Alexander the Great, the abolition of slavery, and the invention of the internet are epic, cool, and awesome. Usually, it's people and events like that that go down in the textbook as having changed the history of the Earth. But what if we told you that nothing at all in the modern world would be possible without one simple thing that everyone has in their kitchen? As you may have already guessed, we're talking about potatoes. And the influence of this vegetable on history is almost higher than the invention of electricity. You don't believe me? Then make yourself comfortable. We have an unusual issue today, and we will be very happy to have your likes under the video, as we suspect that the video will not get many views. But being fans of potatoes, we couldn't get past the historical injustice. If you look at the statistics, the importance of potatoes looks average. It is now only the 5th most important agricultural crop plant on the planet. Potatoes are behind sugarcane, rice, corn, and wheat. To understand the key role of the potato in history, we need to go back in time. At what point were forged all the discoveries that predetermined the development of the planet? Of course, we are talking about the 18th century. At this time, mankind discovered steam engines, began to use coal instead of wood, and laid the foundation for everything we use now. All of this came from Europe, but its environment at the dawn of the Industrial Revolution was so-so. It wasn't that long before the Black Death struck, wiping out 30 to 60% of Europe's population. The plague then returned many times, and with it, the Little Ice Age from the 14th to the 19th centuries. Temperatures on the Earth dropped on average, causing agricultural problems more than once. A prime example was the Great Famine of 1601-1603 in the Russian kingdom. Famine in general was a huge problem of the past. It even reached the point that in France, at the level of law in times of famine, poor people were driven out of the city limits to die a hungry death, but not to spread disease. No wonder, because from 1500 to 1800, according to Fernand Braudel, there were 40 large-scale famines in France, and even more in Britain. To say it was hard is to say nothing. A graph of population growth and urbanization in Europe up to the 17th and 18th centuries shows this perfectly. It looked like an almost flat line, and then something happened, and the numbers went into space. The Industrial Revolution itself took place. Factories appeared, people went to the cities for work, and the foundations that had reigned on the planet for 1,000 years collapsed in a matter of years. Traditionally, great scientists, discoverers, right engines, assembly lines, and vaccines are all cited as causes of this. Along with them, they also name the philosophers whose writings breathed freedom into society and broke the mores of the past. On the subject of slavery, during the Industrial Revolution, it was quite prosperous. As you can see, there are still questions, and they, along with the statements of scientists of the past, were structured in 2009 by Nancy Kean and Nato Nana from Harvard. The scientific work turned out to be large and won recognition in the community. At its center, the scientists put exactly the issue of nutrition. People did not sit in villages out of the goodness of their hearts and could not go to the cities. They lived in the village because for centuries 90% of the time of the majority of the world's population was occupied by the issue of food. Peasants worked in the fields all year round, and once, a significant part of them left the field. So there was something that could feed more people with less effort. That's where the potato comes in. According to the Washington Post, no other plant on the planet provides more calories per square meter than the potato. Planting the land with wheat yields 4,000 calories. After consuming everything grown for food, soybeans will yield 6,000 calories. Rice is already 11, but potatoes are as much as 15. It's worth noting that corn also provides the same number of calories, but we'll come back to them. For people of the past, potatoes had one more undeniable advantage over corn. Potatoes are wildly easy to grow, and most importantly, to store. Other vegetables require special conditions, or they are not as calorie dense. potatoes, the recognized champion of calories and simplicity. It is not for nothing that in the Martian Mark did not decide to grow it, but this is from the height of knowledge of modern man. And did they realize the value of potatoes in the past? Historical data show that, yes, in Volume 4 of a 1771 book entitled A Farmer's Journey Through England, Arthur Young cites a statistic that even with the technology of the past, a family of 4 that switched from wheat, barley, or winter rye to potatoes saved 66% of the land planted. The farmer is amazed by the new miracle vegetable, which can feed both people and animals at the same time, requiring much less effort. The fact that potatoes were new to Arthur is the last piece of the puzzle that holds everything together. After all, the good old potato, which is a national dish for residents of some states, is actually an alien in Europe. You haven't seen potatoes growing wild like weeds on the streets, have you? Don't you see it periodically in South America? It was there, 7,000, 9,000 years ago, that they first began to eat the existing wild bushes and then to cultivate potatoes. The exact homeland is almost unreal. After all, Europeans were originally introduced to the potato from the Andes. But the Andes is the longest mountain system on Earth and hardly a great place for potatoes. Nevertheless, it was the Andean people who appreciated all the above-mentioned charms of the potato and tamed it. Harvest was and still is one of the main celebrations in many mountain villages. The Indians of Bolivia even worshipped the potato, which had its own god, and each tuber was considered an animated being. And the Incas, if you believe the tradition, for one time took the time needed to boil potatoes in certain and standard for the Incas. There was a phrase which we used along with our word hour, and which was quite understandable to everyone. That's how important the vegetable was to the people of South America. And it was from there in 1532, within the framework of the Great Columbian Exchange, that potatoes, together with tomatoes and corn, arrived in Europe, where they were first taken for an ornamental and even poisonous plant due to the incongruity of the bushes. Up until the 18th century, potatoes were something mysterious to Europeans. It is true that in Spain, one use in food was recorded in 1573. In France, in 1555. The father of the European potato is generally considered to be not anyone, but the legendary Francis Drake himself. In the German Offenburg even stood his statue with a potato in his hand, and gratitude for the fact that he saved 1,000 people, concretized the unique usefulness and incredible benefit of the potato. Scientist Antoine Auguste Parmentier, near the end of the 18th century, and neatly around the same time the urbanization of Europe and its population, numbers crept up from our graphs. Specifically, conservative estimates indicate that potatoes were responsible for a 22% increase in human population in the 18th century, and, much more importantly, for the 47% increase in urbanization. That's understandable. After all, it took 3 times less effort in the field to feed the same number of people. There was nothing left for the peasant to do, so they turned to the city. Constant outbreaks of hunger became a thing of the past. Already by the end of the 18th century, 40% of the inhabitants of Ireland ate from solid food only potatoes, and the same number of more affluent alternated it with something else. The fame of the miracle vegetable quickly traveled the continent, but there was still some resistance. There were riots against the potato in France. There were peasants against it. Poland and even the Russian Empire was hit by the trend. Mostly the reasons were down to earth. The peasants were simply afraid that there would be more food and they would no longer be needed. But progress won out, and the freed laborers were drawn to the cities, taking factory jobs, moving production, and changing the face of the planet forever. Some became engineers, some became scientists, and some just sighed gratefully that now the issue of food was much easier, which meant that they could concentrate on other things. This was actually reflected in the statistics of urbanization and the number of population. It is not a fact that Thomas Edison would have recruited enough cheap labor to his factories and had the human resources for mass introduction of electricity. It is not a fact that the Industrial Revolution would have led to such a leap without the extra 1,000 peasants who came to the cities for work. So much for the potato effect, a seemingly simple product. To be fair, let's remember, as promised, about corn. While the potato defeated the famine in the north of Europe, and most scientists agree that in the south it was defeated by the same effective corn, it, too, was brought over from the New World. But corn played a slightly smaller role in population growth and urbanization. But you know what's even cooler? That the potato's influence doesn't end there. After all, together with it and a set from South America, brought Peruvian guano, the remains of the droppings of seabirds, with which the Indians fertilized potatoes. The practice was adopted by Europeans, giving rise to a whole fertilizer industry, which in turn led to a multiple improvement in agricultural efficiency. Also, when potatoes were already planted all over the world in 1859, in the state of Colorado, the entire population was eaten by a mysterious beetle. It was called the Colorado Pest Control Industry, laying the foundation for one more area of agriculture. Colorado farmers used artificial arsenic and started the pesticide industry, which in turn allowed them to control pests in other crops as well. Also, the microorganism Phytophthora infestans killed the Irish in the mid-19th century, their potatoes. It set off a huge famine in the country, which was the first name the masses all moved to potatoes. And on the one hand, it helped scientists develop even more pesticides and fertilizers. And on the other hand, it caused a mass migration of the Irish to the New World. There are now 35,000 Irish descendants living in the United States. The potato is the base, the foundation, and the basis of the qualitative leap of Europe, and by extension, the rest of the world. This leap led to the internet, robots, and anime. So we should say a big human thank you to the vegetable. See you again, friends!